Hello and welcome everyone to the third session of this three-part series for East Bay landscaping professionals serving or interested in serving clients in fire-prone areas. My name is Jessie Godfrey. I'm a horticulture advisor with University of California Cooperative Extension. I serve landscaping and nursery professionals as well as UC Master Gardeners across 5 Bay Area counties. Current themes of my program are fire smart landscaping, integrated vegetation management, irrigation efficiency, and woody plant establishment. I'm available generally to serve you as best as I can with free science-based information to support your work. My contact information will be posted in the chat and also at the end of this presentation. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm available for site visits and additional trainings anywhere in Alameda, Contra Costa, Santa Clara, San Mateo, or San Francisco counties. Getting going, many thank yous to Katie Lowe, statewide coordinator for the UCANR, that's the UC Agriculture and Natural Resources Division Fire Network. She's been supporting this whole series behind the scenes. Couldn't do it without you. Thank you, Katie. I also want to thank Lori Palmquist and the Berkeley Firewise group led by Michelle Tuati, who really helped get the word out about this series. I want to thank our discussion guide tonight, Emily Schlickman, who will introduce herself shortly. Thank you to any participants who contributed photos and stories ahead of this forum. I hope that we'll hear from you directly as Emily moves through her slide deck. And then thank you to everyone here for registering, for showing up, for your attention and your engagement. I do value your time, and I hope you value the discussion tonight. Before we really get going, I want to address one resource which wasn't, I don't think, adequately covered in earlier iterations of this series. And that's the CAL FIRE's Fire Hazard Severity Zone Mapping tool. And then that won't take very long, but I do want to kind of just go over it a little bit with you all and make sure you're comfortable using it. And then, because it's just a first step. And then Emily Schlickman will guide our forum and our discussion, and we'll do a quick closing. Okay. So, if you think you have a client in a high fire risk area, the first thing to do, and again, we haven't done a great job covering this yet, but is to type the client's address, or in this case, my office address, into CAL FIRE's Fire Hazard Severity Zone Map Viewer. You can see in the top left is where you type in the address. Mine is 224 West Winton Avenue in Hayward. Katie, can you put a link to this in the chat?
Yep, already done.
Wonderful, thank you. And so in this case, if you see there's a black icon in the bottom right corner that's circled with a red circle. You can see that here at my office in Hayward, I am not in a moderate, high, or very high fire hazard severity zone. There's no pink, there's no red, there's no orange, there's no yellow. Phew. It also tells me that I'm within city boundaries. So that means that I probably have a city rather than a county fire department as my local fire protection agency. And if you kind of like keep moving down these underlined areas, you see that I do, the Hayward Fire Department. If my office was not in a hatched area, my fire department would most likely be a county fire department. So Alameda County Fire Department, for example. And then kind of moving further down, you can see some contact information for that local fire department, a website, a phone number, and you can use those links to find out more about specific local policies and support for implementing those policies. And be warned that there may be some clicks required to get at this information. When I go to the Hayward Fire Department website, I find that the information I want is under the Office of the Fire Marshal. There's a link to some resources provided for particular neighborhoods. Unfortunately, we're just a teensy bit too late for that this year. Free chipping applications I can see ended on June 5th, but free chipping services for residents are something to advocate for, to engage with as a potential contractor, and just to be aware of throughout your work area, as well as other resources which might reduce the cost of some of fire risk mitigation for your clients. And then there's also a link for annual vegetation inspections, and this should tell me more about the inspection process itself and the specific policies guiding the inspection process for my fire protection agency. And you can use the phone number provided to follow up and get even more information about timelines or whatever it is that you're unsure about. But your local fire department is likely the best resource to get up to date definitely the best resource to get up to date information about defensible space policies. And this is really important because local policies vary now, and they probably will continue to vary even in the case that the state adopts new statewide defensible space guidelines, which take into account Zone 0. This kind of depicts my understanding about current variation across two big East Bay cities, Oakland and Berkeley. The base images utilized are shared in the statewide draft proposal related to Zone 0. Katie, could you post that link in the chat to the press release? And so if you want to know more, again, about how a specific fire department inspection process, including their capacity and approach to handling any wiggle room, you need to talk to them. My experience is inspectors are really reasonable and interested in helping. So pruning back an individual tree from a structure might look like this, even in the city of Berkeley. If you see that kind of focus on the left red block on the Berkeley house. Or it might look like this, or it might look like this, or it might be full removal. So this is a question that residents need to discuss with their inspector and perhaps an arborist.
Sorry, Jessie, if you're sharing screen, we can't see your shared screen.
No, you can see it.
Oh,
I think we're seeing the Zone 0 requirements, Jessie, but maybe not the images that you were hoping to share.
Oh, well, I can see them.
Oh,
let me look at my screen.
I was able to see them also, but it seemed like when you're going through kind of the different tree modifications, maybe that was just the same slide with slight changes in the tree itself.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just if I can click back through. Can you see this?
Yep, we're good.
See what's changing? Okay. All right.
thank you.
Yeah, so I guess there are questions related to how defensible space policy is implemented that should be directed to your fire department. And then fire departments may be referring out to arborists. So in some cities, City of Oakland, for example, the fire department cannot recommend tree removal on their own, even if it's dead. An arborist needs to sign off on that. And so policies really vary, and that's not the case in City of Berkeley. What is the case is they're trying to retain healthy trees as often as it's possible, and it makes sense. So talk to them. They're nice people, even, and so a quick review. You have a client in an area that seems high fire prone. Double check. Enter the address into the CAL FIRE Fire Hazard Severity Zone map to get information on their risk level and their fire department, figure out relevant requirements, ground them by looking around, looking for a fire's pathway to their house, but also to their neighbor's house, to their block, to their neighborhood. Use all the information you learned over the last couple of weeks to communicate with your clients about why the work is important and how to prioritize it. We'll be talking a little bit more about that today in the forum, I expect. And then do your thing. Use your expertise, your creativity, your labor, your goodwill to make it look good, to make it feel good. And don't hesitate to reach out to me or anybody else that you met over the course of this series if you want additional guidance. Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Emily Schlickman.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jessie. And thank you to everyone for being here and for sticking it out for our last part of this series. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Make it full screen. 1 second. Oh, 1 sec. All right. Can you all see this?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right. So as Jessie mentioned, my name is Emily Schlickman, and I am a faculty member at UC Davis, where I teach landscape architecture and environmental design. Prior to coming up to Davis, I lived in the Bay Area for about 7 years, first in San Rafael, then in Richmond, then in San Francisco. And I worked there as a landscape professional, as a designer, and most of my work was really located in fire-prone locations. So for this last part of the webinar series, we wanted to really create a space for folks to share their own experiences, highlighting challenges, but also successes. So we really want to encourage you all to use the chat box or raise a hand if you want to contribute. It'd be really great to hear some voices today. And I want to stress that this topic, as you probably already know, is so complex and it's nuanced. And really, you all are the experts. So please do chime in today if you can and are able. So before we get into our larger conversation about challenges and successes, I wanted to share this image with you all. This is where I lived in Richmond about 10 years ago. It was the first place my partner and I ever bought, and I loved it. I loved the wood siding. I loved the elevated decks. Our condo sat at the top of this ridge. And so from one side of the house, we got incredible views out to the bay, maybe not the other side, which faced Chevron. But I loved it. And I also loved the landscaping. I loved the privacy. But about a year after moving into this property, the Tubbs fire happened, and we obviously were not evacuated. We were not very affected by it, but at that point I had a 2-month-old and our house wasn't very well insulated, and so we did have to leave for a bit of time just because of the smoke. So I'm saying this because that moment really opened my eyes. This site actually isn't in a fire severity zone, but it really opened my eyes to how homeowners and landscape professionals can really make a difference in the Bay Area, and how we can keep the overall character of our homes and neighborhoods while making these spaces safer for everyone. So looking back, I might have done things a little differently with this property. So with that, I wanted to pivot over to a few of our participants who were gracious enough to volunteer and share some of their personal stories. And so first, I wanted to see if Robin was in the room today.
I am indeed.
Hi, Robin. Would you be willing to share your experiences and your imagery here?
Sure, I'd be glad to talk about it. Yeah. So I designed and we installed a garden in Altadena in 2014. And the first image you have there is of the garden when it was, at its maturity there. It was a native garden. The client wanted all natives. Um, and we had a discussion in 2014 um, about the potential for it to go up in smoke. We actually had that discussion. As you can see from the rest of the pictures, it eventually did in the Eaton fire. But she thought that because, hang on a second, she thought that because she lived a mile from Eaton Canyon, and Eaton Canyon was the closest wild land to where she was, that they wouldn't be affected. So we went ahead with the garden with that sort of idea. Um, and one of the things that we did for this garden is we installed irrigation to start these native plants. And as you can see in that first photograph, that's the big plant there is that one is a Baccharis centennial, gorgeous plant, beautiful. I love that plant so much. There were a lot of these in that garden. But what happened is that they continued to be watered after the establishment phase when they probably no longer needed it. So they got very, very big, and I subsequently had a conversation with the owners who are friends of mine about the size of it, and we talked about cutting them back, but they weren't very motivated to cut them back. The interesting thing about it, so the second picture there is the same plant after the fire. And it's Baccharis is a plant that you sometimes see on the fire-resistant lists. I know we talked about that, I think, in the first session, that the fire-resistant lists were actually not very helpful. I've actually taken a propane torch to the leaves of Baccharis pilearis, and I cannot get it to catch light. But obviously, a plant that's as big as the one in the first photograph had a lot of dead wood on the interior, and it lit up very, very easily. The story is they lost the house. The neighbors across the street from them, they lost their house, and it was a family of kids living on one side of the house and the parents living next door to the house that was lost here. And the kids stayed and tried to save both of the houses. They were not able to save this house, my client's house. They were literally stamping out the garden. The garden caught fire. So sorry, it's a bit emotional for me.
Please take
Anyway,
yeah.
yeah. The thing that the rest of these photographs, or the next 5 photographs here of the garden after it had burned, I thought were interesting because they show the irrigation, what happened to the irrigation. When I went around to look at the garden a couple of months after it had burned, I looked around, I couldn't find the drip irrigation. I thought, where's the drip irrigation? You can see the sprinkler, the melted sprinkler there. So the PVC melted, yes, in the third picture there. And then the fourth picture is actually drip irrigation. There's a bit of drip irrigation there. There was barely none left. So basically the drip irrigation had burned probably quite readily. And obviously in places there was wood mulch in the front garden, which I'm not showing here, which was not a garden that we did. There was wood mulch. So you can imagine the combination of drip irrigation and wood mulch. It just was impossible for them to try to stamp it out and keep it under control. The next picture is an irrigation manifold that shows Schedule 40 pipe melted, but it didn't burn. So that's just another sort of data point. The fifth of those pictures, that's Arctostaphylos Dr. Hurd, which also burned very readily. So that's for that garden, oh well, let's skip over the next picture, which is my house.
Oh,
Um,
sorry about that.
yeah, that's all right. No problem. So yes, 4, 5, 6, 7. I revisited again a few months later, and interestingly, the plants had started to regrow. So that's, yeah, thank you. That's Muhlenbergia dubia, which readily came back to life. And then the final picture is Schneeria, which was thriving several months later. And the reason I thought that that was interesting was because or at least worth sharing with everybody, is I sort of walked away from this experience, and I had talked to my friends about what they had learned in terms of landscaping and gardens by observing their whole neighborhood, and which houses had not gone up in smoke and which had. Um, and one of the takeaways for me was, in a neighborhood like that, if I was to re-landscape it, I would do it with I would try to do it without irrigation. I have a whole interest in gardens that have no plastic irrigation in. They're entirely possible in our world, in the Bay Area. They're probably possible in Southern California as well, but it has to be very, very carefully chosen. Um, so I would do it without irrigation, and I would use low growing plant material and cut it back on a regular basis so that there's no buildup of dead wood. That was sort of my takeaway.
Mm.
Yeah. So anyway, I've said a lot. Does anybody?
Great. No, that's really helpful. Do you want to talk at all about your property?
Yeah, so that's my house. So that is a garden which has no plastic irrigation.
Mm.
Um, at least on in the section here in the foreground, the hedge on the left does have, it's a different kind of planting, but everything in the foreground does not have irrigation. It's less than a year old, but it's I've only irrigated it. So I hand water it for establishment purposes, and it's a very carefully selected group of plants that can endure in our climate, go through the summers, and rejuvenate in the winters. Um, I didn't intend this to be a fire resistant garden, but in actual fact, it is relatively the way it's designed. Um, there's not much foliage on the right hand side, right up against the deck, and there's that big paved area
Mm.
also, which creates a easy 5 foot barrier there to the deck. The deck now, I wouldn't, if I was putting in the deck today, I would not have done it with wood,
Mm.
knowing what I know. But that's what
Yeah.
I have. So anyway, and also it has a gravel mulch, which I also would now never do a wood mulch in any house that might burn. And interestingly, my house is, even though it's not rated as any kind of fire risk, it's just a low risk. It is 1 mile from the closest park.
Mm.
Chabot Park is a mile. So that's the same distance that my friend's house was from Eaton Canyon. So while it doesn't show up on any list of fire risk, I do think it could potentially burn on
Yeah.
some occasions. So
Yeah.
if the wind's in the wrong direction. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there you go.
Good to remember that. Well, thank you so much, Robin. Would you also, I know you submitted a couple of images from your friend's house in Watsonville. Would you be open to sharing a little bit about these as well?
Sure. Yeah, he lives out. This is clearly a very high burn risk where he lives, out in the fields, in the meadows and oak forests outside of. It's in Royal Oaks, actually. There's a big eucalyptus grove up there that you can see in the background of the first picture. There was a fire in that eucalyptus grove, and I think that's alerted him to the risk. And so this landscaping that he did behind his house is new, and he was definitely thinking about fire when he did it. Basically, he moved. Is there another photograph? I think there's one other photograph in this.
I think I just have the two in here. I'm sorry if I missed one.
That's okay. But so basically what he did was just move the gardens away from the house, and there's a paved area around the house. And where this first photograph where that's taken from behind me, there's a massive garden area that he just pushed many, many feet back away from the house. So it's not particularly attractive, but it's sort of what we have to do. In the first photograph, that space is probably 10 or 12 feet from the house to that the bank that comes down. And the bank, you can't really see it, but that's planted with rosemary and salvia sinamensis, I think one of the native salvias. So the planting sort of begins away from the house.
Great.
Robin, we've got a question in the chat for you
Yep.
from Carolyn Ruman. Carolyn, do you want to ask your question yourself?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding kind of the goal for not using any irrigation in the landscape now. Is it
Yeah.
so that there's not any plastic in the landscape to burn, or so that things don't get overgrown? I know you mentioned with the
Yeah.
centennial
Yeah.
Baccharis or is it all of those reasons?
Yes, I mean it is. I'm actually coming round to being opposed to plastic irrigation. It's never sort of, it's always felt antithetical to me to put lots of plastic pipe in the garden, which is really actually, it's a long single-use plastic, but it's a single-use plastic that we tear up. We have to, I'm a landscaper, I've been doing it for 40 years, and gardener, and we're constantly repairing irrigation. Irrigation leaks all the time. It's fragile, and it seemed like a good idea at the beginning. It's like, oh, this is a great idea, but it doesn't. It's not sustainable long term. It has to be repaired all the time. So I'm sort of, and also I on Instagram I started following people, and ran across two people that I follow on Instagram. One in the south of France, where they have a very similar climate to ours, and she does not water. She waters for the first 2 years to establish her plants, but beyond that, she doesn't water. She lets everything, either survive or die. And there's a natural process of estivation, which is the summer dormancy in hot climates, in Mediterranean climates, that she embraces. And then there's another. These are both homeowner gardeners. A person in a very dry part of the South Island of New Zealand, and I look at these beautiful gardens that they have, and I'm thinking, why are we not doing this? We're just completely addicted to irrigation. I think we've been sold, and our whole landscaping business industry is built around irrigation. And the way it works is, as a landscape installer, we plant the garden, we put in the irrigation, we set the timer, and we walk away. There's no follow-up. That's that's great. That's fine for business. But in terms of what we've just done to the environment by putting all this plastic in the ground that's going to break down, and then doesn't actually, if we use careful planning, it doesn't need to be there 2 years from now. You do have to establish plants for a couple of years. But after that, you don't need to water them. So I sort of thought, well, why are we not doing this here? And then to answer Carolyn's question, so in terms of going forward with a fire resilient landscape, yes, there's no plastic to burn, and yes, things don't get overgrown because they're not being constantly fed the optimal amount of water to make them grow as big as possible. So I think keeping the overgrowth down is the goal as much as anything. And this is obviously, I'm not talking about zone 0. I'm talking about, what is it, zone 1 that comes next, zones 1 and 2. So yeah.
Hey Robin, we've got a raised hand from Naomi Redding.
Yes.
And then Yala Valakovich would also like the chance to weigh in after Naomi asks her question.
Thank you, Jessie. And thank you, Robin, also for that good information. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about not adding water to the landscapes. My understanding is that when some water is applied to California natives, it does make them more, it increases the hydration. of the plant and therefore makes it more fire resistant. And so I understand in your, wanting to keep the plastics out of the landscape, that makes sense. But from that fire safety standpoint, are you familiar with kind of that science that says occasional watering, especially during the summer, can be useful?
That sounds really interesting. And yes, I have heard about that. Um, and I'm not, this, for me, this is something that I'm investigating and thinking about in a very active way. And so I hadn't sort of come to grips with that piece of information. The gardens I'm talking about are not necessarily California natives. They're great California native plants that I love to use, but I'm not talking about an exclusively native garden. I'm talking about gardens, basically Mediterranean plants from all over that will function without water. So yeah. Um, so um, and and I'm not talking about I'm talking about using water, probably hand watering about once a month for the first 2 years to establish the plants, but I haven't gone a thought beyond that. What happens after those 2 years? But it should only we should only need to water if we use the right kind of plants. We should only need to water about 5 times a year. So I don't think that justifies putting in a massive plastic irrigation infrastructure. So even if it's just hand watering or some system, overhead sprinklers, those oscillating sprinklers, if we're talking about 5 times a year, it's not going to be a massive water use. And that process, which I would use for establishment, could be then continued to satisfy the issue that you're bringing up. So, yeah.
Thank you, Robin. Yana, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I just want to throw out a couple ideas. Robin, thanks so much for sharing these. It's really fun to see people's vision and start to think about some of these things. I was on the first program, whatever it was, 2 weeks ago, and I've done lots of post-fire work similar to like what you were experiencing, walking into a landscape that you knew really well in Altadena and kind of being surprised by what you see and what you don't see. And I just want to throw out a couple thoughts, like the difference between resistance versus resilience. And, like you had plants that reestablished pretty quickly. And I think that's one of the amazing things about much of our natives, and a lot of the plants that we really love are really resilient. They'll come back after fire, but that doesn't make them resistant to fire. They're certainly receptive to it. So just kind of thinking about that terminology and being kind of aware about what outcome you get out of it, I think is an important point to kind of ponder as we make plant selection choices and how we think about what these landscapes can function as and how to find that win-win. And then I wanted to just note something on the photo on the left, because you were talking about the irrigation and how you were surprised to see it burn. And I've seen so many things that have surprised me. Like one of the things is like the boxes that we sink into the ground for shutoffs for our water systems or turn-ons, or we see the piping and venting that comes out of certain rooms. Fire will travel in those plastic items, and in the post-fire environment, you see these voids, and you're like, well, what was that? And it's often that piping, or these shutoff points. And so, what it's really raised to me is just kind of reflecting on what plastic products are generally and how vulnerable they are. So the image on the left really captures me, because I think one of the real challenges we have is that definition between planting units and the borders. And so like, if I'm perceiving this correctly, the curb that's establishing, I'm looking at the left photo, the railing looks like it's cement right there. But right next to it is this, what looks to me to be a plastic fender board to kind of contain the gravel from this really kind of interesting and a nonlinear walkway, which I think is what makes that design delightful, because it breaks up the linearity of it. And just being thoughtful about like those kind of garden separation points can be wicks directly to the structure. So like if you use wood or plastic and you anchor that right into the house, you've got this way that fire can travel right to it. And plastic and wood is much cheaper than Corten or other metal products. But like if you could break that last connection point to the house with the metal, you would add a little more expense in that last bit, but you would kind of prevent that pathway so that it didn't just kind of chain reaction from one location in the garden to the next, and then therefore to the house. So thinking about how we break up that pathway for fire, both in plantings as well as some of these defining elements, to me is kind of starting to figure out how we calibrate our eyes to designing this landscape for the future. And, like the disconnection between units often has a way where there's still some connected flammable element. And so just want to throw that out there as food for thought and how we look at, creating these fun and innovative designs that, find that win-win in it all.
Yeah, could I just respond? Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. Weed block is also incredibly flammable in situations. And I wish that there was, I'd like to go back to copper pipes for irrigation, which is what we used to do. And there are no fittings that actually, even if we had PVC fittings that attached to copper pipes, we'd be in a better situation. But there are very, very few fittings and ways to put plastic sprinkler heads, for example, PVC sprinkler heads on copper pipe. But I think we should think about it and see, if the industry can adapt and go back to using that material.
Interesting. Yeah, and then one last comment is the deck, and then it looks like there's some planting underneath the deck. Like, I don't have a problem building with wood and using wood in an exterior environment, but I have to think about how to protect it better. Like, inherently, it's not like you don't start a fire with a 2x6. Like if you're having a campfire, you always start with something smaller. And so like the deck here is elevated, that's nice, but often a lower deck will use some kind of lattice structure around the base of it to keep animals out. And that lattice is really fine, small in diameter, and so it's easy to ignite. And so it's not the deck itself, it's the lattice that is, surrounding the deck, or it's the fine, smaller vegetation that attaches up to that lattice and to the deck that become the risk points. So, when we use something flammable in a way that attaches to the structure, being thoughtful about how we keep other smaller flammable items off of it so that it doesn't become the pathway. Like with a pergola, you rarely see a big timber ignite, but you get the small stuff on those, and then that's where you see the ignition point, which then sequences to the bigger, heavier timbers.
Great point.
Great. Well, thank you both. This was really a lively conversation. I think for the sake of time, we might move on to our next contributor. Anu, are you in the room?
Yes, I am.
Would you feel comfortable sharing a bit about these images?
Of course. Thank you, Emily. Thanks for having me. My name is Anu Basavaraju. I am one of the owners at Superior Fence and Rail and firesafefence.com. I have spent a little more than a year now trying to gain some expertise in non-combustible fencing, especially for high fire zone areas. These are all installations from the Grizzly Peak area in Berkeley. We've installed Zone 0 fencing in Marin County, of course, the Berkeley area, in Lafayette, Orinda area, etc. I've spent a lot of time trying to understand the right material, and when I say right, aesthetics, pricing, of course, and everything that meets the Zone 0 standards. Most fence companies, including ours, when we started doing fencing, we always have a minimum linear footage before we go and install, which is absolutely not what is required for Zone 0 fencing. So we have kind of altered that to create a fence, a small panel of fence, and a gate as a package. And this was not my original idea, but from Michelle, who helped me figure this out as we installed some fencing for him, actually a lot of fencing for him and neighbors on Creston Road. That way we can provide what a customer needs for Zone 0 fencing. There are a lot of material out there that can classify as a fire resistance fence material. If you go online and Google, you'll find a lot of them. But the last mile, which is an installation, an installer like me, is what is difficult to find when you're looking online. And this is what we're trying, Daniel, my partner, and I, we're trying to bridge this gap where we know what material is available from a local manufacturer or an imported material. Eventually, whatever provides the aesthetics, the pricing, the right price for the material, and a great installation is what we would like to work on, right? So this last mile of installation is what we are trying to get to. We are also trying to package different material to ensure we provide either privacy fences, or some customers don't mind the non-privacy, like the one that you see in the middle here. If you look at the very first installation on the top, you will see that the 5 foot of fence matches the garage and the rest of it is wood, which I think looks very nice as well if you don't need to change all of the fencing in there, right? And as a fence installer or a fence company, it's very difficult for us to send an entire team out just to install that 5 foot of fence. But if there are such requirements on an entire street or in an area, it makes a lot of sense for us and for the customer. We are trying to figure out a way to pass on those savings to customers as well. You have to remember, or from my experience, this is a grudge buy. Most people don't want to spend the money on putting an expensive metal fence because that's not what they plan to do at that point in their lives. But the fire inspectors are coming around saying, hey, you need to change this. Your insurance is saying, well, you're not protected enough from wildfire. And the first impression that I get when I meet a customer is, we don't want to talk to you because we really didn't want to do it. So to change that mindset to, it's actually going to make your yard look safe, look more beautiful, and it's safer. And this is by far the best fence you can get out here, is a tough sell, to be honest. A lot of people have been super nice, but there are people who don't like that they have to spend that money, right? We have found some material that you will see the first one and the fourth picture here, also the second picture here, which are all steel material called MWF solutions. In an area like Grizzly Peak, one of the other things we also had to keep in mind was the wind. It's a pretty high wind area. And when we install aluminum fences, we've had situations where the fence bent a little bit and we had to go back and retrofit it, correct it, make it sturdier. Given the experience I've had installing maybe about 10 to 15 different kinds of iron, ornamental iron, steel, or aluminum fences, there are a couple, in my opinion, that are the winners, where you can paint on them, you can make them look any color that you want, match the aesthetics. It's also super sturdy because it's made of steel. It has really good galvanization on it, and you can paint it any color you want. It's also priced really well compared to an aluminum fence. And that's where we're finding that we are able to turn a customer around from saying, I don't want to do this, to it actually looks really nice. Thank you. And I feel better because now we are a little bit safer. Let's see. Oh, of course, near me. Do you have a question?
I do, thank you. So you said MWF Solutions. Was that a company that you're working with, or is that a type of steel?
It's a manufacturer. So you're welcome to go look at mwfsolutions.com. They are the manufacturers of this particular steel fence. The manufacturers themselves have been installers, and their material comes out of a lot of experience from installing fences. And their goal was, even before Zone 0 became a big deal or fire-resistant fences became a big deal, they were trying to replace concrete walls with metal steel. steel or metal walls. So they could bring down the cost of building these concrete walls. Now you have metal walls, and great timing that non-combustible fencing also became an important part of their business plan. So if you look up MWF solutions, you will see a lot of different patterns that they have. Thank you, Jessie, for posting that.
Great, thank you, Anu. Are there any other questions for Anu? No?
I do have another one as well.
Oh,
So it
go
sounds like
ahead.
you've done a lot of work in the Oakland area. What is your overall service area for Superior Fence and Rail?
Anywhere. So my partner Daniel and I, we own two fence companies, one in Southern California and one up here in Northern California. Out here, we service anything from Napa Valley all the way up to Pleasanton, San Ramon, Dublin, Tracy area. In Southern California, we have portions of Los Angeles County, all of San Bernardino County, Inland Empire, and some of Riverside County. So we do all of the high winds in the Santa Ana winds that hit Southern California. Also had similar requirements there.
Great.
I
Thank
think
you.
we have one
Also,
more question.
can I ask one more quick
Go
one?
ahead. Yep, go for it.
Anu, you had mentioned that some of the aluminum fences that you had installed in the Grizzly Peak area kind of failed or needed adjustment. If you're comfortable sharing, do you know, were those like the Alumission or were they the Knotwood or was it a different brand?
It was, I've had a couple of issues in different areas, one in Berkeley as well, and it was Alumission.
Alumission, okay.
Great. Marilyn,
Thank you.
I think you also had a question?
Well, I had it in chat, but I'm curious to know, are you working to local code requirements or what about your clients? Are they actually paying attention to what the insurance company wants? Because they're actually the 2x4 that's going to come after your client, and they want more than 5 feet.
You are right. It is very difficult to convince a customer that they need to do more than just the 5 feet. And it's not on me to convince them. One, because I don't want to oversell. I come from this position where they're already saying, I didn't want to spend money on this, but I forced it. And then there is the insurance requirement. Sometimes there are nuances, like there are two homes and there is a fence between these two homes that are only 2 or 3 feet away from the actual home. And an inspector told them it's not required to change that fence because it's 50 feet of wooden fence, and changing 50 feet of wooden fence into privacy metal fences can be expensive. So they definitely don't want to do it. They've come there with a mindset that I don't want to do this. I would love to get access to what the insurance wants or what the inspector wants before I install, because it costs me so much less to go in and install twice or 3 times. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle, before you ask your question, we've got a question in the chat. Have you tried hardy cement panels over steel framing?
Yes, we have. We have been discussing these hardy cement panels, but I haven't had an opportunity to install it yet.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Just a small comment about the fence discussion on regulations. The toughest regulation that I know of is IBHS regulations on fences. The main difference between state, Berkeley, and the IBHS regulations is that IBHS requires both parallel and perpendicular fences to be switched in zone 0. So if you've got a fence which is, say, 2 or 3 feet away from your house, like in my house, for instance, and that's parallel to the house, you're talking about switching, according to IBHS requirements, you're talking about switching 40, 50, 100 feet of fence, which is a lot of money. Whereas both state and Berkeley requirements only require fences that are attached to the house to be switched. which means it's only a 5-foot stretch. Now, so far, we have not seen any insurance company actually require the switching of parallel fences. But if it ever happens, the costs are going to radically escalate. When you're talking about 5 feet of fence at a time, it can be, if it's a DIY, it can be $500-$600 or something, sometimes less. When it's done by an installer, it could be $3,000-$4,000. But if you have to install, say, on both sides, 50 feet on each side, you're talking about $20,000 or more easily. So I don't think it's going to be something that's even insurance companies are going to be able to require. I could be wrong.
True, you are right. And that's one of the bigger issues when people come in or residents are looking at this from a grudge buy perspective. Trying to have them spend more really makes it difficult from my perspective. But if I have information such as what you're giving us, Michelle, this is super helpful in also from a logical perspective, help them figure out how safe it is, right? Not just meet standards of what is required by a fire inspector, but also say, this is too close. The two homes are very close to one another and there's only 3 feet gap. And here's a wood fence that's super old and brittle, and it's probably going to be unsafe to have that fence in between those two homes. Berkeley has a lot of nuances. There is not one home that I've seen that's exactly the same as the next home that we see. There are homes it's a single home, but it is detached. There is one room that's detached from the main room, and there are roof overlapping, and an inspector tells them that this is not considered, the wood between the two buildings is not considered a fence that needs to be changed because it seems like the roofs are touching and this is one unit as a home. And I personally don't know how to evaluate it, but that knowledge coming from the Berkeley department would be priceless for someone like me in what we do.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anu, for sharing your products and your the challenges that you face, but also your successes. We really appreciate that, and I appreciate all the questions and comments. So our next two participants are going to be discussing the Ember initiative in Berkeley. So we wanted to bring in Councilmember Blackaby, or perhaps Lori, if you're here, to provide a general overview of the Ember initiative and to share some resources. So Councilmember Blackaby, are you here? Or Lori, are you here?
I'm here.
Great.
You can see me.
Perfect.
Everybody. I know kind of been on the last couple of calls and there's been a fair amount of discussion about Ember. Lori, please leap in and add or correct any details here. We don't have as many pretty pictures. We have more of the regulatory text. So that's what we've got here. On the left-hand side kind of is our Zone 0 summary in terms of what the ordinance is in Berkeley and what it means, the Ember resistant zone as we're interpreting it here in Berkeley. It's applied 5 feet from any structure. It requires removal of all vegetation from within 5 feet of the structure, except mature trees, which is very, very important. Removal of all debris, including palm fronds, leaves, grasses, and weeds. Clean your roofs and gutters. The third point is limbing trees that extend into Zone 0. Must be removed or thinned and must be 5 feet clear of a roof and 10 feet clear of a chimney. Certainly limiting combustible items. We've heard a little bit about that earlier tonight, but plastic or wooden outdoor furniture, storage cabinets, relocating firewood outside the zone, encouraging the use of hardscape, in particular, no combustible mulch. Gravel is what most people are using, or some form of something that is non-combustible. We've just talked about the fencing gates and arbors, relocating garbage and recycling containers. Those are kind of the don'ts and the things that we're asking people to remove or relocate. What is permitted are non-combustible planters with plants that are less than 18 inches high that you can easily move indoors or outside of zone 0 on those extreme fire weather days. And again, we are encouraging and asking people to keep those mature shade trees. That's such an important part of living in the hills. We really want to encourage people as much as possible. We're going out of our way to figure out how we can maintain and keep those wonderful shade trees. We just need to make sure they're pruned and minimize kind of the risk and create some separation of the structure. And then a recommended piece, we don't require this, but it's highly recommended, and the department provides free material, but it's installing mesh on all vents, gutters, and around deck openings. We know that's, again, a really important part of preventing fire from entering a home. On the right, I've just got a set of links to a bunch of different materials. We can make these available, obviously, online. That'll be easier for you to click and find them, but lots more material about the Ember requirements, about how we support defensible space. We've got a great chipper program, the Firewise program that Michelle and Meg will be talking about shortly, and just the amazing communities we have that are doing Firewise all across Berkeley. We've got a number of different financial support components that we're continuing to try and add more support for people to make sure that they can get assistance in complying. And then so much of this is about conversation that homeowners have with inspectors and with the department. So reaching out to the Berkeley Fire Department, there's a website, berkeleyfiresafe.org, and the Wildland Urban Interface Division, which is wildfire@berkeleyca.gov. And our office is also happy to assist or route people in the right direction. Lori, anything else I missed?
Maybe just your favorite, the whammer.
That's right. That's right. This is, and again, I encourage Michelle and Meg to talk about this a little bit, but one of the great things that I think the department has done, and this has been in consultation with community members, is identifying ways that people can meet the requirements and meet the fire safety needs, but accommodating unique conditions on a property, accommodating that very special tree or that very kind of rare piece of vegetation, making sure, where possible, that we can make those accommodations. It may require that you have to extend your 5-foot zone farther out from that piece that you're protecting. It may mean that it might require replacing windows and doing other things to make the structure stronger if we've got something kind of, a little closer than 5 feet from the home. But where possible, we've got what we call the WAMR, which is the Wildland Alternative Means and Measures Requests. We've got a series of, I think, at least 5 or 6 of these now that examples that are on the website. So if you've got a particular kind of tree or a particular kind of, some sort of structure in the yard or something that you're trying to accommodate, we're trying to figure out a little more standardized ways that we can deal with those things and still make sure the homeowner is substantially compliant with Ember and making sure that their home is fire safe. So WAMRs are kind of the fire department's favorite acronym because it's fun to say, but it's also really an important part of, again, trying to build where we can some flexibility into the requirements. The requirements are there because we know that that's best practice, but if we can sort of add some flexibility that if you give a little bit here and give something else a little bit somewhere else, we can still substantially get to where we need to be. So I think that's our summary.
You've got a question from
Sure.
Naomi Redding.
Hello. Thank you again for the information. I was curious about the WAMR for, what would you guess is kind of the percentage of people that are using this and asking for exceptions and the alternative means? Is it 80% are oh, you know what? Maybe I'm the exception and don't have to do everything? Or is it really much a smaller portion of people saying, okay, I'll do what I have to do? Or is it after they've gotten the violation notice that they are really pursuing it? What is kind of the utilization of that provision?
I'd say it's still a relatively small component, but I think it's also one of those things where we say, look, if you schedule your inspection, schedule your walkthrough with the fire department, with the inspector, and then you have the conversation, that's where these things can kind of be identified. And so, we've had, I think, 600 inspections in sort of the zone 0 zone over the last 9 to 12 months. So not everyone has yet been inspected. There's more of those inspections to do. And I think by and large, I think for most people, it's still just easier to kind of figure out how to comply. And, there are a lot of standard things that everyone has to do. So not everyone needs a WAMR, not everyone wants a WAMR, but it's basically finding, maybe in that, Michelle probably has a better sense of the numbers, she's seeing it, but, less than 50% of the time, maybe about a quarter of the time, but people who really, really have a very passionate point of view about something they're trying to maintain, and how do we figure out how to try and accommodate that. So it's definitely not the majority, and it's always in consultation with an inspector where you have that conversation and identify it kind of mutually and say, hey, this might be something that, okay, let's figure out a way to solve this if we can.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was an incredible overview, and it's really helpful to see all of these resources that hopefully people can take a look at online and learn more about them. So thank you so much, Councilmember.
You betcha. Thank you.
Thank you. So shifting over to the two participants who are open to sharing kind of their experiences with the Ember Initiative, I wanted to see if Meg, are you available to chat?
Yeah, I am.
Hi. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really humbled to be in this group with so many people who are have so much experience with gardening and landscaping. I'm a real newbie when it comes to gardening. I just got started 5 or 6 years ago. We had junipers in our yard. The house is located in the Grizzly Peak mitigation area. And the Berkeley Fire Department came to inspect, and they said, you probably really should get rid of the junipers. They're dying and they're incredibly flammable. So we pulled them out, and we removed bamboo that was, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. We removed bamboo that was located between my garage and my house, which you can see there's that photo of the shadow of me with the dirt plot. And I worked with a landscape designer and a contractor to put in a garden, which is that first photo, the left-hand corner, where we have oregano, pincushions, and I apologize, I don't know the Latin names, California poppies and things like that. And then that was probably, I think the inspection was 2023, where it was noted it wasn't necessarily a violation because it wasn't in zone 0, but it was a recommendation that we acted on. And then in 2024, we installed the garden. And then in 2025, I did a lot more reading and talked to my landscape person. We'd chosen those plants because they were native and drought tolerant, and we thought they were fire resistant, but they really weren't appropriate for zone 0. So we went back to that picture on the right-hand side top that shows the area. We ripped everything out and went back to square one in terms of what our redesign was to be really wildfire safe. And you can see the examples in 2025, what we ended up installing, which was DG and pavers and a variety of gravel types, as well as some metal artistic structures that we had, sculptures that were made, some ceramic items as well, and then some large boulders to give some variation to it. And I really enjoyed the first garden. We had a lot of butterflies and hummingbirds, but I've been really, really happy with the way the zone 0 has turned out. And it's been a really nice garden. So I think that the thing that I took away from it all was, gosh, I wish that I'd had more of the resources that we talked about today available to me at the time that I was making these. And hopefully the next group of people who embark on these types of projects now won't go down rabbit holes where they're pulling out their vegetation and having to go back to square one on it.
Yeah, I hope so.
Oh, and I guess the one other thing I would say is that I also, and I don't have a photo of it, is I have a variety of metal planters that are in my zone 0. They're less than 5 gallons. They're small cactuses and things like that are less than 18 inches high, and they're 1.5 foot apart. So I have those on my deck, which you can't see in the photos here, but there's something that I have out, and they're nice, but they're easily movable. So on red flag days, I move them down and out of my zone 0.
Great.
We've got a question in the chat kind of related to zone 0 transitions, and that's has anyone transplanted Large shrubs, small trees, maybe like a Japanese maple or camellia successfully. Is that something anybody wants to share about?
I think Michelle
Well,
was
the plants
talking
that you
about.
see there, I transplanted, and we had pretty good success in transplanting them. We just got them out of zone 0 and into other areas. I didn't have any large trees, though. I can't speak to that one.
Michelle, did you have your hand raised? I think you'll be talking about this soon also, right?
I did, but I do have examples in the pictures, although I wish the
Yeah.
pictures were better. And I can also talk through other plants that were transplanted with or without success that I don't have pictures for.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll hold on those pictures for a second. Was there one other hand raised?
Yeah.
My hand's up. I actually have a question here. In looking at picture number 2, is that actually a roof that's next door to this walk area?
That's correct. And that actually was something that was a challenge for us in terms of addressing zone 0, because the garage was adjacent to the house, and we ended up filling it with rocks and then putting slate material on top of it to prevent the accumulation of leaves in that area. So that was something I worked with BFD, as well as Michelle was really helpful to me in terms of like, how do we address this issue here?
So actually, it brings to mind an entirely different issue, and that is that it's, essentially something incredibly flammable right next to your 5-foot area. And I'm wondering if, maybe there should be a metal retaining wall that goes up that would shunt flame from coming towards your house, for much like when you have an uphill draft situation, you want to put something in that'll allow the wind to buffet away from something. I just think it's a curious problem, and I'm just kind of interested in that.
We've got a couple other raised hands. Brent Blackaby, do you want to weigh in?
I just wanted to say thanks to Meg, but also she's underselling herself a little bit, because not only is she a landscaper, but she's really kind of a community organizer in our neighborhood. She's an across the street neighbor, and she's kind of the ringleader of our Firewise community. And so I would just sort of say, I think, again, what's so great about what's happening in Berkeley is not only is she doing this in her own home, but she's helping kind of set the example and sort of communicate and bring other people along. So anyway, I just want to thank her, not just for this tonight and sharing this, but this is really inspirational work that's helping the whole neighborhood.
Right back at you, Brent, for leading this effort. Really appreciate it. Brent's my co-lead.
There were a few other hands up, I believe.
Go for it, Robin.
Yeah. I just wanted to respond to the question about moving plants and trees. I mean, certain trees, Japanese maples, surprisingly, are very, very movable. You can grow them in pots and pull their roots apart, and they seem to endure if you do it at the right time of the year. In terms of moving large shrubs, the only way we've been successful with that is to cut them down to about a foot, just cut off everything and transplant them, try to make sure they have enough water, do it at the right time of the year in the winter when there's so much water around that they barely know that they've moved. So I just wanted to answer that question. Somebody.
Thank you. Have you done that specifically with camellias, for example, like cutting them down to 1 foot? And I imagine trying to get like as large a root ball as possible would help it be more successful.
I haven't done it with camellias, but I don't see why it wouldn't be. As long as you do everything right and make sure that it just gets lots and lots and lots of water with a big root ball, I think you'd be fine. But it's going to take a while to recover. But because it has a big root ball, it's going to be better off than buying a new plant.
I actually have done it with camellias. I moved about 6 camellias about 15 years ago that were quite large and very old. And I transferred them actually from being planted in the ground into putting them into 36-inch boxes completely away from the area they were in. And, I'd say they did amazingly well. It's just, as you say, getting the root ball to move. And I didn't cut them back at all.
So maybe to continue the transplanting conversation, Michelle, maybe you could speak a little bit to these images that you shared with us. Is that okay?
Sure. Do you want me to start with the transplanting or to go with the original plan?
Whatever you want to do is fine with me.
All right. If that's okay with you, Emily, and by all means, tell me no. There's a few details that I'd like to show on the pictures that
Great.
will also talk to some of the things that were discussed earlier. Is it possible for you to zoom on some of these pictures or not?
Oh goodness, I maybe can.
If you can you zoom all the way to the back of the first picture?
Yes.
Okay, if you zoom, yeah, exactly. If you zoom all the way to the back against the concrete wall, you're going to see that this is at the very bottom of this is the new irrigation, and it's all copper. So I still have the old irrigation around because I'm in the middle of transitioning, but my new irrigation is now all copper. It's actually buried under from, near the house, all the way under the gravel, and then going all the way to that wall. And then on that wall at the back, you can see all of it in copper surfacing with the shutoffs. And then from there, it's going one side on the left and one side on the right to two groups of heads. So that's one thing. Now, if you can zoom back, if you can zoom back out and go to the upper right out there, if it's possible.
Up here?
Yeah, that one there. So unfortunately, I was trying to illustrate very specific points that I'm going to discuss, but I'm realizing I should have included a couple of much better pictures to show what it can look like. If you look at that picture here, you see a bunch of different kinds of non-combustible edgings. On all the way to the right, at the bottom right, you see a very thin streak that's starting practically at the corner. Further down, it's alongside the very first flex. Yeah, you just passed it. If you see there, right there, this is actually a corten steel. It replaced the plastic edging that Yana was talking about. I had plastic edging like this everywhere. I also had plastic edging in the area right there exactly, which I replaced by basically stones. And then I have other areas which are not identified there where I'm using smaller stones as well. And I'm using all different styles of stone. And so we've tried different methods to replace. Now I don't have any plastic edging left altogether. Then if you zoom back out, I will mention specifically the transplanting. Oh, I think
that's my problem.
Okay, all right. So if you look at the first picture on the left, and you might need to zoom in a little bit, you see right there, you see a jade plant, not very big, and immediately behind it, a fairly tall rhodie. Yeah, this one. And then behind it, a rhodie. So this rhodie was transplanted last December. It survived nicely. The jade plant was much, much bigger when it started. They were all living in the zone 0. The jade plant was basically 6 or 7 feet tall, and I basically took out all of it but one limb, and I replanted the limb 5 feet away. There also are on the right, on the second picture, on the picture to the right, and here you can't really see it. That one there, where exactly this one here. There were both successes and failures. Here, the Streptosolan jamesoni, which is a marmalade bush, which was a 10-foot, 12-foot bush. I cut it down like Robin suggested in spring last year, and then in winter I transplanted it, and it was successful. And immediately behind it, you can't really see it, or not very well. Immediately behind the Streptosolan jamesoni, right where you have your hand, I have a Dicra febrifuga, which is about it used to be a 12-foot tall evergreen hydrangea. And that one, I transplanted it a year and a quarter ago, but unfortunately it failed the moment the temperature started rising. I probably wasn't watering it enough. In terms of other successes and failures I've had success transplanting Daphnes. I've had success transplanting Japanese maples, and I've had both success and failures transplanting lemons. I've transplanted 3 lemons. One of them was a large Eureka lemon. I tried, I thought it was way too big to transplant with its existing foliage. So I shrank the foliage fairly radically, although nowadays it's not so recommended anymore, according to what I'm reading. But I cut the foliage radically down to making it maybe a 4-foot tree from an 8-foot tree. And then in spring, and then I transplanted it in winter, and it just didn't make it. Whereas I transplanted 2 other Meyer lemons, one of them very young and one of them about 7 or 8 years old, and both of them are very successful. Although I transplanted them to an area where deer are active, and the first year of their life, the deer were very aggressive. One thing I'd say is it's really important to do that early in transplanting season. For me, it's typically December. The transplants that I do in late January or February are much less likely to be successful. One last thing I'll mention is people have talked about doing it with root balls. It's great when you're able to do that, but when you're talking about a 15 or 20 foot, an 8 to 12 foot tall tree or large shrub, the root balls are huge, and it's very difficult for people like us who don't have 4 or 5 staff. And I've also had success doing it in bare root transplants. In fact, my two successful transplants for lemons were bare root, and my failed transplant was a full root ball. But when you get over 100 pound of root ball, which is very commonly true. For instance, if you look on the right-hand side at this Japanese maple, the root ball for this Japanese maple is 30 years old. The root ball for this Japanese maple would be quite significant and very difficult. The only way we're able to transplant it, we moved it slightly, was because we're able to slide it straight through by digging a hole from one side to the other. Okay, this is to address everything that was discussed. Again, I wish I had taken different pictures because this is only illustrating a specific point. I was intending to talk only about large shrubs or small trees. Now, we know that under amber, large trees are almost always satisfying the ordinance in zone 0. So the only thing you have to do is you've got to do some pruning. The answer, by the way, Beth, is yes, boulder fountains are permissible in zone 0 in Berkeley, also with IBHS and also with the state. We know that large trees are 98% of the time they can pass the ordinance with no problem, except they need some significant pruning. We know that shrub and brush is never acceptable in zone 0 and has to be removed. And so the gray area is large shrubs and small trees in the 8 to 14 foot area because they don't clear the roof typically, and so you're left with a lot of foliage inside there. So I use different kinds of strategies, and I'm going to talk about these. So the first one here on the left-hand side. So by the way, I like Robin, I'm not a landscaper, but I'm a very, very average gardener. So I landscaped all of this about 25 years ago when I bought the house. And then I realized painfully that I had made huge mistakes at the time. I had only looked at the species of plants that I was buying, and I was looking for things that were very well hydrated, like fruit trees and things like that. But I hadn't realized at all that the location was important. And so 70-80% of what I planted was right close to my house or close to my neighbor's home. So I had to do a radical reshuffle. And that was really emotionally difficult because many of these trees and shrubs were mature. So when we started this process about 3 years ago, I had a Mendocino-like lush garden all the way around the house. So one of the first things we did is we changed all of the wood mulch. We had wood mulch everywhere. We changed that to rock, different kinds of rock. And we changed all of the edging anywhere to stone because it was the simplest and what we thought was going to be the nicest. We also incidentally removed a lot of the decks that we had, wood decks that we had, and swapped them for concrete. On the first picture on the left here, this is the facade actually of the house. It's a Japanese garden. It used to be absolutely covered. You couldn't see the side of the house underneath there. It was absolutely covered with small trees, large shrubs, and there were basically 3 or 4 levels of plant. Now there's nothing. And of course, the landscaping is not redone yet, complete yet. So there's more work to do. But the clearing is actually complete. So the way we did this is we did a hybrid. We did transplants, and I've talked about some transplants, and we also did pruning. According to the Amber ordinance, what you can do is you can keep trunks and large limbs near within zone 0, but you can't keep the foliage. And so what we did is that we did some extensive pruning. So if you so I talked already about the transplants we did early on. If you can look at 1, 2, 3, no, picture number 4, which is the lower right, this is the back of this area there. And you're going to see a fairly large, by about a 16, 17 foot tall rhodie in the background. And in the foreground, you have about probably a 7 foot tall Japanese maple, which is mature. And the Japanese maple was very, very slightly relocated, transplanted, really pulled over a little bit. And it was very sharply pruned by an artistic pruner. She was actually Japanese. She's a very talented woman, because I would never have been able to essentially create an asymmetrical but aesthetic Japanese maple. In the back, the rhodie, we were able to actually prune it where both of them used to be within a foot of the structure. We were able to prune the rhodie in a manner that it worked nicely. We would actually have been able to leave limbs in there as well, but we simply decided not to, in part because when we started this process, the only regulation that was in place was IBHS, and IBHS does not allow any trees, regrettably, in there. The next thing we tried is, in the second picture from the left, we've already talked about the fact that some of the transplants succeeded, some of the transplants didn't. So here, what used to be on the right alongside the house, where we now have rocks, we used to have a very tight row of 10 to 12 foot tall shrubs. I transplanted some and I replanted others to an area which used to be immediately to the right of it, which is basically more than 5 feet away, which used to be an herb garden. And then I extended that raised area for another 10 feet by creating another herb garden. So it was a game of shuffleboard, if you will. Then on the upper right-hand picture, and if you can zoom a little bit on it, I wish I'd shown other pictures, but in that picture, you can actually see that there's a good number of trees.
I'm so sorry. Hold on one second.
That's okay, no worries. You can see that you can keep a lot of trees in there. I believe I have probably, in my small lot, which is about 8,000 square feet, including the house, I probably have about 8 or 9 trees over 15 feet tall, maybe a little more, and I'm planting more of them. I'm basically replacing. So if you look on the right-hand side, right alongside the house, I used to have a closer, like right around there, I used to have a row of fruit trees. I had a lot of fruit trees. Because of the IBHS requirements, I decided to cut them down because I didn't think it was possible to transplant them. They were too big. They were all in the 10 to 15 foot range, and they were big trunks. They were also planted very, very near the house. So what I decided to do is I decided to create another planting area across where there used to be flagstone, and that's the area that you see right across there. And I just replanted things 4 weeks ago. So here you have right now Pittosporum Marguerite Shannon on the left. You've got right behind the Pittosporum, you have an elderberry black lace, which is going to grow to about 12 feet because I had another one that was about 12 feet. The Pittosporum could grow easily to 20 feet. I used to have a Pittosporum a few feet to the left there, but it was too close to my neighbor's garden, so I cut it down. And this Pittosporum I'm expecting to let grow at least to 15 feet in a tree form. And then to the right, I have the third plant. Yeah, exactly. A little bit to the right of this there is it's a Mexican mock orange. And that Mexican mock orange, I expect to grow up to about 8 feet. I have another Mexican mock orange in the back that's about 8 feet tall. So we tend to be able to grow plants very tall on that side of the house, and it's not true on the opposite side. One other thing that I'll mention is you can see there is a cloth a cloth watering hose, a garden hose, which is the only one that I have left of that type. Over the past few months, I've been replacing them all with the 316 stainless hoses. And that's the only one I have left. And then behind, you see a small 3-step deck, which is concrete. That's also fairly recent. I used to have an Ipe deck. And even though Ipe is a Class A material, IBHS does not like Ipe or anything that's Class A. They actually want only non-combustible material altogether. And there's very little that's non-combustible, really. Yeah, you know, there's going to be essentially concrete, metal, and fiber cement, more or less, and flagstone. And so this, by the way, allows the fact that I've got this deck now, allows my zone 0 to start at the wall of the house. Whereas before, when it was Ipe, it would have started at the edge of the Ipe, and that meant that I would have had to take down more trees further. And if someone talked about a fountain, immediately to the left of this deck, there's a large, exactly right around there, there's a very large rock fountain, which is about 1.5 tons of a single rock plus a bunch of rock around it. So we had intended to install it closer to the deck, answering the question about whether it's legal, but in the end, aesthetically, it looked better otherwise. So altogether, I think I'll be able at the end of this re-landscaping effort to have as much green as before, maybe even a little more, but it'll take years before it's mature. You know, this was a 25-year-old, very mature garden, and, you know, I'll probably be dead before it's mature like that again.
Beautiful.
So do I have 1 more minute to talk about WAMRs?
We're running a little short on time,
right.
and I do want to make sure there's enough time for Jessie to wrap things up. Also, I'm so impressed with how the discussion has gone, because I think I prepared 30 additional questions that were collected, but we didn't have a chance to go through them. But maybe there's a way, Jessie and Katie, that we could share this PDF perhaps after the meeting. But I do want you to know that there are a number of questions related to these 5 different topics. And I took a lot of imagery and information from these 3 guides, which you probably all are familiar with, but I wanted to share them here. But for the sake of time, because I believe we only have 2 minutes left, can I hand it back to you, Jessie, to kind of wrap up, if that's okay?
Yeah. I know that there are still questions and there's still conversations that people would like to have with each other. And it really illustrates to me the need for these forums where kind of industry experts can communicate about their strategies for adapting landscapes for yet another kind of through yet another landscape transition. I guess I think this isn't the first one that we've been through in California. I think waterwise landscapes have been around for a while. Lori and her contingent knows this well, and yet there are these kind of there's an aesthetic shift, I think, happening. People's expectations for landscapes are shifting around waterwise landscapes, and I expect they'll also shift around fire smart landscapes or defensible space in different, not just in, you know, we're used to seeing them in the Sierra Nevadas, and they're coming to the Coast Range as well. And you guys will be there for it, everybody in this room, I can tell. So, you know, I hope we can do our best to organize additional forums like this. Please provide feedback in the surveys about what has been the most useful to you all, so that we can kind of put our effort where it has the greatest value. And yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for showing up and participating. And we'll share out resources accumulated yet again.